The salt-crusted shiphouse loomed against the Maine coastline like a skeleton from another century, its rotting timbers groaning in the Atlantic wind. Sarah Martinez clutched her eviction notice as she approached the inheritance she'd never wanted, a decaying monument to a grandfather she'd never known. Living out of her car with 2 young children, she had nowhere else to turn. But as she stepped aboard the listing vessel, something felt wrong. The floorboards beneath the captain's quarters gave way with a thunderous crack, revealing a hidden vault that had remained untouched since 1847. Inside, stacks of gold coins and ancient documents told an impossible story. Her grandfather hadn't been the simple fisherman she'd believed. He'd been Captain Blackheart Martinez, one of history's most feared pirates, and he'd hidden his greatest treasure where no one would ever think to look. The problem? Someone else knew about the inheritance, and they'd been waiting decades for the right moment to strike. Fresh tire tracks in the sand outside told Sarah she wasn't alone anymore. But who else knew the truth about her bloodline, and how far would they go to claim what they believed was theirs? Sarah's hands trembled as she knelt beside the vault, her cell phone's flashlight illuminating coins that gleamed despite their age. The musty air carried the weight of centuries, and she could barely comprehend what lay before her. Each gold piece bore unfamiliar markings, Spanish and Portuguese inscriptions that spoke of merchant vessels and royal treasuries from a time when the seas belonged to those bold enough to claim them. A leather-bound journal rested atop the treasure, its pages yellow and brittle. She carefully opened it, squinting at the faded ink that chronicled her grandfather's exploits across the Caribbean. The entries detailed raids on merchant ships, battles with naval forces, and eventually his decision to disappear from the pirate world entirely. The final entry, dated December 1847, revealed his plan to settle in Maine under an assumed identity, leaving his fortune hidden beneath what appeared to be nothing more than an eccentric fisherman's dwelling. "Mama?" 8-year-old Emma's voice drifted from outside the shiphouse. "Can we come in yet?" Sarah's heart lurched. She'd left Emma and 5-year-old Miguel in the car while she explored the property, promising to return in 10 minutes. That had been nearly an hour ago. The weight of responsibility crashed over her as she realized the magnitude of what she'd discovered. This wasn't just about her anymore. This treasure could change everything for her children. No more sleeping in the car, no more choosing between groceries and gas money, no more watching Emma's face fall when other kids talked about their bedrooms and toys. But those tire tracks outside haunted her thoughts. Someone had been here recently, and given the remote location of the property, it couldn't have been a casual visitor. The shiphouse sat on 3 acres of isolated coastline, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that wound through dense pine forest. Her grandfather had chosen his hiding spot well. She photographed several pages of the journal with her phone, then carefully selected a handful of the smaller coins, stuffing them into her jacket pocket. The rest would have to wait until she could figure out how to properly secure and transport such a fortune without drawing unwanted attention. As she climbed back through the broken floorboards, her mind raced with questions. How many people knew about Captain Blackheart Martinez? Had her family been watched all these years? Her mother had died when Sarah was 16, taking any family secrets with her. Her father had never been in the picture. She'd grown up believing she was alone in the world, with no legacy beyond struggle and disappointment. The afternoon sun was beginning to fade as she emerged from the shiphouse. Emma and Miguel had fallen asleep in the back seat of their battered Honda, Emma's arm protectively wrapped around her little brother. The sight of them stirred something fierce in Sarah's chest. Whatever dangers this discovery might bring, she would face them. Her children deserved better than the life she'd been able to provide so far. She approached the car quietly, her eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The tire tracks were fresh, the tread patterns still clearly defined in the damp sand. Whoever had been here possessed knowledge that should have died with her grandfather over a century ago. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Welcome home, Sarah. Your grandfather would be proud." Ice water seemed to flood her veins. No one knew she was here. She'd told no one about the inheritance, hadn't even decided whether to accept it until desperation left her no choice. Yet someone was watching, waiting, and apparently had been for quite some time. Sarah slipped into the driver's seat, her hand instinctively moving to the coins in her pocket. The metal felt warm against her palm, solid and real in a way that her previous life never had. Whatever came next, there was no going back. The vault had been opened, the secret revealed, and powerful forces were already in motion. The game had begun, and her children's future hung in the balance. The rusted padlock gave way with surprising ease, as if it had been waiting decades for someone to finally turn the key. Sarah's hands trembled as she pulled the heavy door open, releasing a musty breath of salt air and forgotten years. Sunlight struggled through grimy windows, revealing the skeletal remains of what had once been her grandfather's pride. "Mom, it smells weird in here," Emma whispered, pressing closer to Sarah's side. "It's just old, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." But Sarah wasn't entirely convinced of her own words. The Shiphouse felt different than she remembered from childhood visits, heavier somehow, as if the shadows themselves were watching. Dust motes danced in the pale beams, filtering through broken boards, and somewhere in the darkness, water dripped steadily against wood. She pulled out her phone's flashlight and swept it across the interior. Tools hung from pegs along the walls, their metal surfaces bloomed with rust. Coils of rope sat in corners like sleeping serpents. In the center of the space, covered by a paint-stained tarp, stood the hull of an unfinished boat, her grandfather's final project, abandoned when his arthritis made the work impossible. "Can we explore, Mom?" Jake had recovered from his earlier sulk and now viewed the Shiphouse as a potential adventure. "Stay close to me. Some of these floorboards might be rotten." They moved deeper into the building, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Sarah remembered coming here as a child, watching her grandfather's weathered hands shape wood with tools that seemed like extensions of his body. He'd told her stories while he worked, tales of storms weathered and catches that seemed too large to be true. She'd believed every word. The back corner held his office, a cramped space separated from the main workshop by thin walls. Sarah pushed open the door, surprised to find it in better condition than the rest of the building. A desk sat beneath a small window, its surface covered with yellowed charts and faded photographs. She recognized some of the faces, her grandfather as a young man, standing beside boats and other fishermen whose names she'd long forgotten. "Look at this old stuff," Jake said, picking up a brass compass from the desk. "Does it still work?" "Probably not, but be careful with it anyway." Sarah opened the desk drawers one by one, finding the usual detritus of a working life. Pencils, rubber bands, receipts from decades past. In the bottom drawer, her fingers brushed against something unexpected, a leather journal, its binding cracked but intact. She lifted it carefully, noting how her grandfather's distinctive handwriting covered the first page she opened. The entries were dated, spanning several years in the 1980s. Most seemed to be routine notations about weather and fishing conditions, but as she flipped through the pages, certain phrases caught her attention. "Still watching the house today. Think they know about the package. May have to move it again if this keeps up." A chill ran down Sarah's spine that had nothing to do with the damp air. She was about to read further when Emma's voice called from the main workshop. "Mom, there's someone outside." Sarah's heart jumped. She shoved the journal into her jacket pocket and hurried out of the office, gathering her children close. Through one of the grimy windows she could see a figure standing near the Shiphouse entrance, a man in a dark coat who seemed to be studying the building with unusual intensity. "Who is that?" Jake whispered. "I don't know." Sarah's mind raced. The property was isolated enough that casual visitors were unlikely, and something about the man's posture suggested this wasn't a chance encounter. The figure began walking toward the Shiphouse. Sarah pulled her children deeper into the shadows, her pulse hammering in her ears. The journal in her pocket seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. Through the gap in the door, she watched the man approach with careful, measured steps. He was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and sharp features that suggested he missed very little. When he reached the entrance, he paused, examining the broken padlock Sarah had left hanging from the door frame. His expression was unreadable, but something about his focus made her skin crawl. "Stay quiet," she breathed to Emma and Jake. The man stepped partway into the ship house, his eyes adjusting to the dim interior. Sarah pressed herself and her children against the wall, praying the shadows would hide them. For a long moment he stood motionless, listening. Then, without warning, he spoke. "Mrs. Chen, I know you're in there. I'm not here to hurt you or your children. We need to talk about your grandfather's legacy." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. This wasn't random. Whoever this man was, he'd been looking for her specifically, and somehow he knew about whatever secrets her grandfather had left behind. Her grip tightened protectively around Emma and Jake as she realized their simple plan to sell the property had just become something far more dangerous. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of the ship house as Maya knelt beside her grandfather's desk, pulling out drawer after drawer with trembling hands. Each one yielded nothing but moth-eaten papers and rusted paperclips until her fingers found a hidden catch beneath the bottom drawer. The wood panel slid away, revealing a leather-bound journal wrapped in oilcloth. Her heart hammered as she unwrapped the book. The leather was supple despite its age, and gold lettering spelled out E. Chen, private across the cover. She opened it carefully, squinting at her grandfather's precise handwriting in the dim light. June 15th, 1987. They're getting closer. Found tire tracks near the dock this morning. Different car than last week. Chen family has guarded the secret for 3 generations, but I fear my time as keeper is ending. Maya's breath caught. Keeper of what? She flipped pages frantically, scanning entries that spoke of watchers and the burden passed down, and mysterious references to something called the Meridian Cache. Her grandfather's paranoia, which she'd always attributed to his war trauma, suddenly seemed terrifyingly rational. A passage dated just months before his death made her blood run cold. The Blackwood Syndicate has patience, but not infinite patience. They know Maya exists. When I'm gone, she'll need protection she doesn't even know she requires. The ship house holds everything, the fortune, the proof, and the key to ending this once and for all. But she must be smart. One wrong move and they'll eliminate her just as they did her father. The journal slipped from Maya's numb fingers. Her father hadn't died in a construction accident. He'd been murdered. Footsteps crunched on gravel outside. Maya's head snapped up, every nerve screaming danger. Through the warped window glass, she glimpsed 2 figures approaching the ship house, a tall woman in an expensive coat and a burly man whose hand rested inside his jacket. Neither looked like morning joggers or lost tourists. She snatched the journal and scrambled toward the back of the building, her mind racing. There had to be another way out. The ship house was built over the water on one side. If she could reach the dock, the front door rattled as someone tested the lock. Maya spotted a narrow window near the rear wall, half hidden behind stacked crates. She climbed over the obstacles as quietly as possible, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the window's corroded latch. Behind her, she heard the distinct sound of lockpicks scraping against metal. The window finally gave way with a soft groan. Maya squeezed through the opening just as voices echoed from inside the ship house. "Spread out. Check everything." She was here. The dust patterns are fresh. Maya dropped silently onto the wooden dock below, her sneakers finding purchase on the weathered planks. The journal pressed against her ribs where she'd tucked it inside her jacket. Water lapped gently against the pilings, masking the sound of her movements as she crept along the dock's edge. She needed to reach her car, but it was parked in plain view of the ship house entrance. Her only option was to circle around through the marsh grass and approach from the roadside. Crouched low, Maya made her way through the reeds, their sharp edges catching at her clothes. Mud squelched beneath her feet, and she prayed she wouldn't sink into a soft spot. The voices from the ship house grew more agitated. "Nothing in the desk. Check for loose floorboards." Victor's not going to be happy if we come back empty-handed again. Victor. Maya filed the name away as she reached the edge of the parking area. Her ancient Honda sat 50 yards away, keys thankfully in her jacket pocket alongside the journal, but crossing that open space would leave her completely exposed. She waited, muscles coiled, watching the Shiphouse windows. When both figures moved deeper into the building, she ran. Maya's feet pounded against the gravel as she sprinted toward her car, the journal bouncing against her side. 20 yards, 15, 10. There! The shout came from behind her just as she reached the Honda. Maya's fingers fumbled with the keys, her hands slick with sweat and marsh water. The engine turned over with a reluctant cough, just as the woman in the expensive coat appeared at the Shiphouse door. Maya floored the accelerator, gravel spraying behind her as the Honda lurched forward. In her rearview mirror, she saw the burly man speaking rapidly into a phone while the woman wrote down her license plate number. Her chest tight with fear, Maya drove toward town, constantly checking her mirrors. The rural road remained empty behind her, but that offered little comfort. These people, this Victor and his associates, had been watching her family for generations. They knew where she lived, where she worked, where Emma went to school. The journal's weight against her ribs felt both precious and terrifying. Whatever secrets her grandfather had died protecting, they were hers now. Along with the deadly responsibility that came with them, Maya pressed harder on the gas pedal. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. The children's laughter echoed from the beach as Maya crept back toward the Shiphouse, her heart still hammering from the encounter with the stranger. She clutched the brass compass tighter, its weight both comforting and terrifying. Whatever secrets her grandfather had buried here, people were willing to kill for them. Inside the musty interior, she examined the compass more carefully. Intricate engravings covered its surface, not just decorative flourishes, but what looked like a coded map. Tiny symbols marked specific points around the compass rose, and when she held it up to the light streaming through a broken plank, she noticed something else. The back panel was slightly loose. Her fingers worked at the edges until it popped free, revealing a hollow compartment. Inside lay a folded piece of oiled cloth, yellowed with age but remarkably preserved. With trembling hands, she unfolded it to find her grandfather's familiar handwriting. Maya, if you're reading this, then the wolves have finally come calling. The fortune they seek isn't gold or jewels, though it's worth far more. Your great-great-grandfather didn't just captain fishing boats, he smuggled something precious out of Europe during the war, something that certain people have been hunting for 80 years. Maya's breath caught. The war, World War II. She thought of the old photographs in her mother's albums, the ones of stern-faced relatives she'd never met. The Shiphouse sits on more than memories, child. Below the floorboards, beneath the foundation, lies a chamber your ancestor built. Inside that chamber are documents, proof of war crimes, stolen art, identities of collaborators who escaped justice. The Nazi hunters never stopped looking, and neither did the families of those who betrayed their own people for gold. The paper crackled as Maya's hands shook. Nazi hunters, war crimes. This wasn't some romantic treasure hunt. This was about justice delayed but not forgotten. The compass will guide you, but beware. We've been watched for generations. They know you exist, know you inherited this place. Trust no one who claims to want to help. The man with the scar on his left cheek works for those who would see the truth buried forever. Maya's blood turned to ice. The stranger on the beach, she'd glimpsed a pale line across his cheek when he'd turned his head. Her grandfather's warning felt like a voice from beyond the grave. If you choose to open this door, there's no closing it. But your children deserve a future free from poverty, and the world deserves the truth. The first symbol on the compass points to where you must begin. The letter ended abruptly, but at the bottom, her grandfather had sketched the same symbol that appeared at the compass's north point. A small anchor crossed with what looked like a key. Maya studied the Shiphouse interior with new eyes. She'd assumed the anchor symbols carved into various support beams were merely nautical decorations, but now she noticed their subtle differences. Only one matched the sketch exactly, and it was positioned near the back corner where the shadows lay deepest. Kneeling beside the beam, she ran her fingers along the carving until she felt something give slightly. The anchor symbol was actually a cunningly disguised lever. When she pressed it, a section of the floorboard nearby shifted with a soft click. "Mom?" Emma's voice drifted from outside, closer now. Maya quickly refolded the letter and slipped it into her pocket alongside the compass. "Coming, sweetheart!" She let the floorboard settle back into place, but made a mental note of its exact location. Tonight, after the children were asleep, she would return. Outside, Jake was showing Emma how to skip stones, their earlier complaints about the boring beach forgotten. For a moment, watching them laugh together in the afternoon sun, Maya felt the weight of her grandfather's legacy pressing down like a physical force. These innocent children playing by the water, they had no idea their lives had just changed forever. "Did you find anything cool inside?" Emma asked, bounding over with sandy feet and bright eyes. Maya forced a smile. "Just some old fishing equipment, nothing exciting." The lie tasted bitter, but how could she explain to her 8-year-old daughter that they'd inherited a legacy of wartime secrets and present-day danger? As they walked back toward their tiny rental cottage, Maya kept glancing over her shoulder. The beach appeared empty, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Every shadow seemed to hide potential threats, every distant figure a possible enemy. That evening, she made the children's favorite dinner and let them stay up late watching movies, desperate to give them a few more hours of normalcy before everything changed. Because deep in her heart, she knew there was no real choice to be made. Her grandfather had been right about one thing: her children deserved better than the hand poverty had dealt them. But more than that, if the documents hidden beneath the Shiphouse could bring justice to those who had escaped it for 8 decades, didn't she have a moral obligation to act? The compass seemed to pulse in her pocket like a second heartbeat, marking time until nightfall. The rain hammered against the Shiphouse windows as Maya crouched beside the loose floorboard, her flashlight beam dancing across the hidden compartment beneath. Her hands trembled as she reached into the dusty void, fingers closing around what felt like an old leather portfolio. The musty smell of decades-old secrets filled her nostrils as she carefully lifted it out. Behind her, Tommy shifted restlessly in his makeshift bed while Lily murmured something in her sleep. Maya glanced back at her children, ensuring they were still asleep before opening the portfolio with painstaking care. The leather cracked slightly, releasing more of that ancient smell. Inside, yellow documents were arranged in careful order. The top sheet bore her grandfather's familiar handwriting, though the ink had faded to a rusty brown. "If you're reading this," it began, "then they've found us again. Trust no one, Maya. The consortium has eyes everywhere." Maya's breath caught. How did he know she would be the one to find this? The date on the letter was from 3 months before his death, but he'd written her name specifically. She read on, her heart pounding with each revelation. "The ship that brought our family to America carried more than passengers. Hidden in its hull were artifacts from the lost Templar treasury, smuggled out of France during the Revolution. Your great-great-grandfather was tasked with protecting them, and that burden has passed down through our bloodline ever since." The next page contained hand-drawn maps of the Shiphouse, with X marks indicating locations throughout the structure. Maya counted 12 different hiding spots, each marked with cryptic symbols. She recognized some of them from the strange etchings she'd noticed carved into various beams and posts around the building. A sudden creak from outside made her freeze. The rain continued its relentless assault, but underneath it she could swear she heard footsteps on the wooden dock. Maya quickly switched off the flashlight and crawled to the nearest window, peering through a gap in the boards. 2 figures in dark rain gear stood at the end of the dock, their faces obscured by hoods. One held what looked like a metal detector, while the other swept a powerful flashlight beam across the Shiphouse exterior. They moved with the practiced efficiency of people who knew exactly what they were looking for. Maya's pulse raced as she backed away from the window, the portfolio clutched against her chest. She considered her options. The main entrance was too exposed, but her grandfather had shown her a hidden exit years ago, a loose panel near the back wall that led to a narrow passage between the building and the rocky shore. The men were getting closer now. She could hear their muffled voices through the storm, though she couldn't make out the words. Moving as quietly as possible, Maya gathered a few essential items and gently shook Tommy awake. "Mama?" he whispered, instantly alert. "We need to leave quietly, baby, like a game. Can you help me wake Lily without making any noise?" Tommy nodded solemnly, understanding that this wasn't really a game. Together, they roused Lily, who started to protest until Tommy covered her mouth with his small hand and shook his head seriously. Maya stuffed the portfolio into her jacket and gathered their few belongings. The hidden panel was behind a stack of old fishing nets in the far corner. She'd played there as a child, never imagining she'd need to use it as an escape route with her own children. The panel slid aside with a soft scraping sound that seemed deafeningly loud in the silence. Beyond lay a narrow crawl space that led to the rocks behind the building. Maya went first, then helped her children through one by one. They emerged into the driving rain just as she heard the shiphouse door splinter open behind them. Voices echoed through the building, growing more agitated. The men were inside now, searching. Maya led her children along the treacherous rocky shoreline, staying low and moving away from the dock. The storm provided perfect cover, but it also made every step dangerous on the slippery rocks. Lily whimpered once, and Maya quickly scooped her up, balancing her daughter while still holding Tommy's hand. They made it to the old access road where she'd hidden their car behind a copse of pine trees. As Maya fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking from cold and adrenaline, she saw lights beginning to sweep the shoreline behind them. The men had discovered their escape route. The engine turned over on the third try. Maya didn't dare turn on the headlights until they were well down the mountain road, putting distance between them and the shiphouse. In the rearview mirror, she could see flashlight beams still dancing through the trees. "Where are we going, Mama?" Tommy asked quietly. Maya gripped the steering wheel tighter, her grandfather's words echoing in her mind. "Trust no one. The consortium has eyes everywhere." She thought about the 12 locations marked on his maps, about the fortune he'd claimed was hidden throughout the shiphouse. Whatever those men were after, they weren't going to give up easily. Somewhere safe, she told her son, though she wasn't sure such a place existed anymore. The floorboards groaned under Elena's weight as she descended into the shiphouse's basement, flashlight beam cutting through the musty darkness. The air grew thick with the smell of brine and decay, as if the ocean itself had seeped through the foundation over the decades. Behind her, Marcus followed silently, his presence both reassuring and unsettling. "Your grandfather was careful," Marcus said, his voice echoing off the stone walls. He knew they'd never stop looking. Elena's light swept across the basement, revealing stacks of mouldering crates and rusted maritime equipment. "Who exactly is they? You keep speaking in riddles." Marcus stepped beside her, pulling out his own flashlight. "The consortium. They've been tracking maritime treasures for over a century. Your grandfather stumbled onto something that belonged to them, or so they believed." The basement stretched further than Elena had expected, extending beneath what must have been the entire property. Water stains marked the walls in dark patterns, and she could hear the distant sound of waves against the foundation. Her grandfather had built this place to last, even as the sea tried to reclaim it. There, Marcus pointed to the far corner where a heavy wooden chest sat partially hidden behind a collapsed shelf. "That's what we need." Elena approached cautiously, remembering the booby trap upstairs. The chest bore the same maritime symbols she'd seen throughout the house: anchors, compasses, and something that looked like a stylized kraken. Her grandfather's initials were carved into the lid, alongside a date, 1943. "The war," she whispered, running her fingers over the carved numbers. "Your grandfather wasn't just a fisherman during the war," Marcus explained. He was part of a network that smuggled people and valuables out of occupied territories. Some of those valuables, well, not everyone agreed they should stay hidden. Elena lifted the heavy lid, wincing as the hinges protested. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay a collection of documents, photographs, and a smaller metal box. She lifted the papers first, shipping manifests, coded messages, and what appeared to be maps of coastal routes. The photographs made her breath catch. Her grandfather as a young man, standing beside boats she didn't recognize, surrounded by faces that spoke of desperation and hope. Refugees, she realized. He'd been saving lives. The consortium funded both sides of various conflicts, Marcus continued, watching her examine the contents. They'd lend money for weapons, then claim historical artifacts as collateral. When the war ended, they came to collect. Elena opened the metal box, revealing a collection of what appeared to be ancient coins and a leather journal. The coins bore symbols she didn't recognize, certainly not American currency. The journal's pages were filled with her grandfather's careful handwriting, documenting dates, locations, and names. He kept records of everything, she murmured, flipping through the pages. Every person he helped, Wait. Her finger stopped on an entry dated just 3 years ago. Her grandfather had died 5 years ago. This can't be right. Marcus leaned over her shoulder, and she caught the scent of salt water and something else. Gunpowder. What does it say? It's about my children, about watching over them. But grandfather died before Emma was born. Her voice trembled as she read the careful script. Marcus, this handwriting, it's not quite right. Someone else wrote this. The sound of footsteps above froze them both. Elena clicked off her flashlight, and Marcus did the same, plunging them into complete darkness. The footsteps were deliberate, methodical, someone searching the upper floors. The consortium, Marcus breathed in her ear. We need to go. Now. Elena fumbled to gather the documents and box, her hands shaking. The footsteps above grew louder, accompanied by voices, at least 2 people, maybe more. She could hear furniture being moved, boards creaking under weight. Marcus grabbed her arm, guiding her toward what she hoped was another exit. This way. Your grandfather was paranoid. There's a tunnel that leads to the old dock. They moved through the darkness by feel, Elena clutching the metal box against her chest while trying to keep the papers from rustling. Behind them she heard the basement door open, saw the first glimmer of flashlight beams painting the walls. Faster, Marcus urged, pushing aside what felt like a heavy curtain. Cool air rushed toward them, carrying the sound of waves. The tunnel floods at high tide. We have maybe an hour. Elena stumbled forward into the narrow passage, her mind reeling with questions. If her grandfather had been dead for 5 years, who had been maintaining his records? Who had been watching her children? And why did Marcus seem to know exactly where to find everything? The sound of pursuit echoed behind them. As they plunged deeper into the tunnel, the metal box's contents rattling with each hurried step. Whatever secrets her grandfather had died protecting, Elena was beginning to understand that some people had never stopped killing for them. The tunnel stretched ahead into blackness, and behind them the voices grew closer. The rain hammered against the Shiphouse windows as Elena spread the waterlogged documents across the workbench, her hands trembling from both cold and adrenaline. The emergency lantern cast dancing shadows across pages that had remained hidden for over 40 years, their secrets finally bleeding through water-damaged ink. "Mom, what's all this stuff?" Tommy asked, pressing closer despite her earlier warnings to stay back. "I'm not sure yet, sweetheart." Elena's voice caught as she recognized her grandfather's distinctive handwriting on a maritime contract dated 1982. The document bore official stamps from the Port Authority and what appeared to be an insurance company she'd never heard of, Meridian Maritime Holdings. Sarah bounced impatiently on her toes. "Can we go home now? I'm hungry." Elena's stomach twisted with guilt. Her children should be eating dinner in a warm kitchen, not standing in a freezing, storm-battered building while she chased ghosts. But something about these papers felt urgent, as if time was running out faster than she'd imagined. A photograph slipped from between the contract pages, landing face up on the workbench. Elena's breath caught. The black and white image showed her grandfather standing beside a sleek yacht, his arm around a woman Elena had never seen before. The woman was elegant, wearing pearls and a confident smile that didn't reach her eyes. Elena flipped the photo over. In her grandfather's careful script, Margaret Blackwood, The Deal, August 1982. Blackwood. The name sent ice through Elena's veins. She'd heard that name before, whispered in fragments of her grandmother's phone conversations years ago, always accompanied by worried glances and lowered voices. "Tommy, can you take your sister to the car? Turn on the heater and wait for me." "But, Mom—" "Now, please." Her tone brooked no argument. Once the children were gone, Elena focused on the remaining documents. A shipping manifest listed cargo transferred from a vessel called the Meridian Star to her grandfather's warehouse. The items were described only as private collection, authenticated historical artifacts. No specifics, no values, just cryptic reference numbers and her grandfather's signature at the bottom. The final page made her blood run cold. It was a letter, dated 3 days before her grandfather's death. "Samuel, you cannot hide from this forever. The terms of our agreement were clear. If you die before returning what belongs to us, we will collect from your heirs. Your granddaughter has children now. Remember that. M. Blackwood." Elena's hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the letter. Margaret Blackwood knew about her, had known about Tommy and Sarah before Elena even realized she was being watched. A sharp crack echoed through the shiphouse as something heavy struck the front door. Elena spun around, her heart hammering. Through the rain-streaked windows, she could see the outline of a figure on the front porch. Another blow landed against the door, followed by the scrape of metal on wood. Someone was trying to break in. Elena grabbed the lantern and documents, stuffing the papers into her jacket as she moved toward the back of the building. The children were in the car 50 yards away, too far to reach without being seen. The front door splintered open with a final crash. "Mrs. Vasquez?" a man's voice called out, calm and professional. "I'd like to speak with you about your grandfather's business arrangements." Elena pressed herself against the wall beside the rear entrance, trying to control her breathing. Through the darkness, she could hear careful footsteps moving through the shiphouse. "I know you're here, Mrs. Vasquez. Your car is outside, and I saw the light from your lantern. I'm not here to hurt you. I simply need to discuss the return of certain items that belong to my employer." The voice was getting closer. Elena could see the beam of a powerful flashlight sweeping across the walls near where she'd been standing moments before. Her phone buzzed with a text message. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the silence. "Mom, where are you? There's someone walking around the building." Elena's blood turned to ice. If this man had an accomplice outside, Tommy and Sarah were trapped in the car. "Ah, I believe your children are concerned about you." The man's voice held a note of dark amusement. "Perhaps we should discuss this situation before anyone gets unnecessarily worried." Elena made a split-second decision. She turned off the lantern, plunging the rear section into darkness, then slipped through the back door into the storm. The rain immediately soaked through her jacket, but she used the noise to mask her movement as she circled toward the car. Through the rear window, she could see Tommy's terrified face, illuminated by his phone's screen. Sarah was crying in the passenger seat. Elena ran. The storm had passed, but Maya's hands still trembled as she examined the leather journal by candlelight. The pages were brittle with age, filled with her grandfather's cramped handwriting and detailed sketches of the shiphouse's hidden compartments. Each entry painted a darker picture than the last. Entry 47. They came again today. Watched the house from the tree line. The consortium grows impatient, but they still don't know about the real treasure. Eleanor was right to hide it where she did. Maya's breath caught. Eleanor, her grandmother who died when Maya was barely 10. She flipped through more pages, searching for clues about this hidden treasure that seemed far more significant than the gold coins they'd already found. A soft knock at the kitchen door made her freeze. Through the rain-streaked window, she could make out a familiar silhouette. Detective Chen stood on the porch, water dripping from his jacket. "Maya, I saw the candlelight. Everything all right?" She hesitated before opening the door. Chen had been helpful so far, but the journal's warnings about trusting no one echoed in her mind. "Power's out from the storm," she said, keeping the door partially closed. "Kids are sleeping upstairs." Chen nodded, but his eyes were scanning the kitchen behind her. "I wanted to update you on those men who broke in. We ran their prints through the system. They're not in any criminal database, which is unusual for burglars." "What does that mean?" "It means they're professionals, possibly military or intelligence background. Maya, I think you and your family might be in more danger than we initially thought." As if summoned by his words, headlights swept across the front windows. A black sedan pulled into the driveway, followed by a second vehicle. Maya's blood turned to ice. "Back door," she whispered, grabbing Chen's arm. "Now." But it was too late. The kitchen door burst open, and 3 men in dark clothing filed in, weapons drawn. The leader was the same man who'd questioned her at the coffee shop, Valdez. "Detective Chen," Valdez said with mock politeness. "How convenient to find you here." Chen reached for his weapon, but froze when one of the men pressed a gun to Maya's temple. "I wouldn't," Valdez continued. "We're all going to have a civilized conversation about the Blackwood legacy." "I don't know what you're talking about," Maya said, though her voice shook. Valdez smiled coldly. "Your grandfather was a clever man, but not clever enough. He stole something that belongs to us, something worth more than the handful of coins you've found." "How do you know about—" "We've been watching this house for 30 years, Maya. Every visitor, every repair, every moment your grandfather spent digging in that basement. We know he found Eleanor's cash, but we also know he moved it before he died." Maya's mind raced. The journal was still on the kitchen table, but Valdez hadn't seemed to notice it yet. If she could keep his attention focused on her. "Even if that were true, why would I know where it is? I hadn't seen my grandfather in years." "Because," Valdez said, stepping closer, "you're not just any granddaughter. You're Eleanor Blackwood's direct descendant through the female line." She was very specific about who could access her final secret. A creaking sound came from upstairs. Maya's heart clenched as she realized Emma or Josh might be waking up. She had to end this before her children got involved. "Detective Chen has backup coming," she lied. "You need to leave." Valdez chuckled. "Detective Chen called in sick today. Quite thoughtfully, actually, considering we needed some privacy for this conversation." Maya looked at Chen with growing horror. His expression was carefully neutral, but he wasn't denying Valdez's implication. "Maya," Chen said quietly, "these people aren't going away. Your family has been carrying this burden for generations. Maybe it's time to let it go." The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. She'd trusted Chen, confided in him about the coins, let him into their lives. Now she realized his helpful appearances, his timely arrivals, had all been orchestrated. "The journal, Maya," Valdez said, finally noticing the leather book on the table. "I assume it contains your grandfather's notes about Eleanor's hiding place?" Before Maya could react, one of the men grabbed the journal and handed it to Valdez. He flipped through it quickly, his smile growing wider. "Excellent, though I suspect the real clues aren't written down. Your grandfather was paranoid enough to keep the most important information in his head, or pass it along through family stories." "I don't know any family stories," Maya protested. "Perhaps not consciously, but Eleanor was a remarkable woman, a cryptographer who worked for the government during World War II. The treasure she hid isn't gold, Maya, it's information. Codes, identities, secrets that could topple governments even today." Another creak from upstairs, followed by the soft sound of footsteps. Emma's voice drifted down. "Mom, is everything okay?" Valdez's expression hardened. "Bring the children down, detective. It's time for the whole family to participate in this treasure hunt." The wooden floorboards groaned under Elena's weight as she descended into the Shiphouse's hidden basement. her flashlight cutting through decades of accumulated darkness. The air hung thick with the scent of rotting wood and something else, something metallic that made her stomach clench. Behind her, Maya's breathing came in short, nervous puffs. "Mom, I don't like this," her daughter whispered, gripping Elena's jacket so tightly her knuckles showed white in the flashlight's beam. Elena wanted to turn back, wanted to grab both children and run as far from this cursed place as possible. But the memory of those men in the black sedan, the way they'd watched her house with predatory patience, kept her moving forward. Whatever lay hidden down here might be their only chance at survival. The basement stretched further than she'd expected, extending beneath what must be the entire structure. Ancient maritime equipment lined the walls, rusted anchors, coiled rope thick with mildew, and wooden crates bearing faded shipping marks. But it was the far corner that drew her attention, where something glinted in the shadows. "Stay close," Elena murmured, making her way toward the metallic gleam. As they approached, the flashlight revealed an iron safe, easily 4 feet tall and built like a fortress. Its surface bore the same shipping company logo she'd seen on grandfather's papers upstairs. Maya gasped. "Is that where the treasure is?" Before Elena could answer, a sound from above made them both freeze, footsteps crossing the main floor of the shiphouse. Heavy, deliberate steps that definitely weren't Tommy's. Elena's blood turned to ice. She clicked off the flashlight, plunging them into absolute darkness, and pulled Maya against the wall behind a stack of crates. They pressed themselves into the shadows, hardly daring to breathe. The footsteps multiplied. At least 3 people, maybe more, moving through the upper level with practiced stealth. Elena heard the soft creak of boards, the whisper of fabric against wood. These weren't casual intruders, they moved like professionals. "Check every room," a man's voice drifted down through the floorboards. The old woman said the entrance was hidden behind the bookshelf. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Mrs. Chen. They'd gotten to Mrs. Chen. "What about the kid?" another voice asked. "He was supposed to be here. Probably ran home to Mama. We'll deal with the family later." Maya's fingers dug into Elena's arm. The terror in her daughter's grip mirrored Elena's own fear, but underneath it, a fierce, protective anger began to burn. These bastards were threatening her children. A new sound reached them, wood splintering, furniture being overturned. The men were tearing the place apart, searching systematically. It was only a matter of time before they found the basement entrance. Elena leaned close to Maya's ear. "When I say run, you go straight up those stairs and out the back. Don't stop, don't look back. Get to the car and drive to the police station. I can't leave you. You can, and you will. Your brother needs you." The sounds above grew closer. Elena could hear them in the room directly overhead now, their movements more urgent. One of them cursed as something heavy crashed to the floor. Then, cutting through the tension like a blade, came the distant wail of sirens. The footsteps above suddenly stilled. Shit. Someone called it in. "Move. Move." The sounds shifted toward the front of the building, boots pounding across the floor. Elena waited, counting heartbeats, until she heard the slam of doors and the roar of engines retreating into the distance. Still, she didn't move for another 5 minutes. When she finally clicked the flashlight back on, Maya's face was streaked with tears. "They're gone," Elena whispered, though she kept her voice low. "But we need to work fast." She turned back to the safe, examining its surface more carefully. The combination lock was old but well-maintained, its brass numbers still clearly visible. Beside it, a small brass plate bore an inscription in her grandfather's careful handwriting, "For those who remember where the heart finds harbor." Elena frowned. The phrase meant nothing to her, but something about it tugged at her memory. Heart finds harbor. She'd seen those words before, somewhere in grandfather's papers. The sirens grew louder, closer. Soon this place would be crawling with police, and any chance of accessing the safe would disappear. Elena pressed her palms against the cold metal, trying to think. "Mom," Maya said suddenly, "didn't that letter mention something about a heart, The one from grandfather's friend? Elena's breath caught. The letter. Marcus had written about their shared memories, about the place where young hearts found safe harbor. Not just harbor, safe harbor. It had to be connected. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the photos she'd taken of grandfather's documents, searching for any other reference to hearts or harbors. The police sirens were almost on top of them now. Time was running out, but Elena finally understood. This wasn't just about a combination, it was about family history, about memories that went deeper than mere numbers. The real treasure hunt was just beginning. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the shiphouse as Sarah pressed herself against the inner wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the gaps in the weathered planks, she could see 3 figures moving systematically through the lower level, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness like predatory eyes. Emma and Jake huddled behind her, their breathing shallow and quick. Sarah placed a protective hand on each of their shoulders, feeling their small bodies trembling. The narrow crawl space beneath the upper deck, where they'd hidden, felt more like a coffin with each passing second. "Check the workshop again," came a gruff voice from below. The old man was clever, could have built false walls anywhere. Sarah recognized the voice immediately. Vincent Carruthers, the man who'd been watching their house. The realization that he'd been hunting her family for years made her stomach churn. How long had they been planning this? How long had her grandfather known they were coming? A metallic scraping sound made her freeze. Someone was climbing the ladder to their level. She motioned frantically for the children to crawl deeper into the shadows, toward the back wall where her grandfather's workshop tools hung like ancient sentinels. The space was barely 3 feet high, forcing them to move on hands and knees across the dusty wooden planks. "Mom," Jake whispered, so quietly she almost missed it. His small hand tugged at her sleeve, and she turned to see him pointing at something glinting behind a collection of rusty plane tools, a brass handle, nearly hidden by decades of accumulated debris. The footsteps above grew closer as Sarah carefully moved the tools aside. The handle was attached to a small panel in the wall, another of her grandfather's hidden compartments. Her fingers found the mechanism he'd taught her to recognize, a simple sliding motion that released the catch. The panel opened silently, revealing a space just large enough for the 3 of them. More importantly, she could feel cool air flowing from within. Another exit. "Get in," she breathed to the children. "Quickly." Emma went first, her slight frame disappearing into the darkness. Jake followed, and Sarah squeezed in after them, pulling the panel closed just as heavy boots thundered across the floor above their hiding spot. The passage was pitch black and smelled of salt and old wood. Sarah felt her way forward, one hand on Jake's back, following the current of fresh air. The sound of their pursuers grew muffled, then distant. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, they emerged through a cleverly concealed opening behind the shiphouse, among a tangle of wild rose bushes that scratched at their clothes and skin. The thorns were a small price to pay for freedom. Sarah pulled out her phone, its screen casting an eerie blue glow on their dirt-streaked faces. No signal. They were still too close to the water, too isolated. She needed to get them somewhere safe, somewhere she could think. "Where are we going?" Emma asked, her voice barely audible above the wind that had picked up off the harbor. "To find answers," Sarah replied, though she wasn't entirely sure what that meant yet. As they crept away from the shiphouse, staying low and moving through the shadows between abandoned buildings, Sarah's mind raced through everything her grandfather had told her during those childhood visits. The stories that had seemed like fairy tales then felt desperately real now. He'd mentioned other places, other hiding spots around town. The old mercantile building where he'd worked as a young man. The church basement where town records were kept. The lighthouse keeper's cottage that had been empty for 30 years. But there was something else, something that nagged at the edge of her memory. A conversation from years ago, when she'd been maybe 10 years old. Her grandfather had been teaching her to sail his small dinghy, and they'd anchored near the breakwater while he told her stories about the town's history. "The real treasure isn't gold, little sailor," he'd said, using his pet name for her. "It's knowledge. And sometimes, knowledge needs protecting until the right person comes along to use it wisely." She'd asked him what he meant, but he'd just smiled and changed the subject to cloud formations and weather patterns. Now, running through the night with her children's lives in danger, she wondered if he'd been preparing her even then, if all those sailing lessons, all those stories about hidden passages and secret codes, had been more than just an old man's way of entertaining his granddaughter. They reached the edge of town just as the sound of engines roared to life back at the harbour. Carruthers and his men were expanding their search. Sarah looked down at her children's trusting faces and made a decision. They wouldn't keep running. It was time to stop being the prey and start being the hunter. "Come on," she said, turning toward the old mercantile building. "Grandpa left us more than just riddles. He left us weapons." The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke as Sarah crouched in the shadows of the shiphouse, raindrops hammering against the weathered wood like bullets. Through the grimy window, she watched Victor's men methodically searching the main room, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness she'd just escaped. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed herself against the outer wall, clutching the leather journal she'd managed to grab before fleeing through the loose floorboard. The children were safe with Mrs. Chen, but for how long? Victor had made it clear that her family's safety depended on her cooperation, and here she was, hiding like a criminal instead of handing over what he wanted. The journal felt warm against her chest, as if her grandfather's secrets were burning to be revealed. She'd only had seconds to scan the pages before the men arrived, but what she'd seen made her blood run cold. Names, dates, coordinates, and a hand-drawn map that looked disturbingly familiar. "Nothing here," one of the men called out, his voice muffled by the storm. "Just old ship parts and rust." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. They were looking in all the wrong places, just as she had been for weeks. The real treasure wasn't hidden in the walls or buried beneath the floorboards. According to her grandfather's journal, it was much closer than anyone had imagined. A hand clamped down on her shoulder, and Sarah's scream caught in her throat as she spun around. Detective Morrison stood behind her, his face grim in the lightning-illuminated darkness. "We need to talk," he whispered, pulling her further away from the building. "Victor knows you're here. He's got men surrounding the entire property. How did you—" "I've been watching this place for 3 days," Morrison cut her off. "Ever since you disappeared from the hospital. Sarah, you're in deeper trouble than you know." They moved through the rain-soaked underbrush, Morrison leading her toward a rusted fence that bordered the old maritime district. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process his words. If he'd been watching the Shiphouse, then he knew about Victor's involvement. But whose side was he really on? "The man who tried to kill you at the hospital," Morrison continued, helping her through a gap in the fence. "His name was Anton Kozlov, Russian military, discharged 5 years ago for war crimes. Victor's been bringing men like him into the country for months." Sarah stumbled, her legs weak with exhaustion and fear. "Why are you helping me?" Morrison paused, rain streaming down his face. "Because 25 years ago, your grandfather saved my father's life, and because Victor Draven murdered my partner when she got too close to his operation." The pieces clicked together in Sarah's mind like tumbling dominoes. Morrison's relentless questions, his knowledge of her family's history, the way he'd appeared at exactly the right moments. He wasn't just investigating her grandfather's death, he was hunting the same man she was running from. "What operation?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "Your grandfather wasn't just a shipbuilder, Sarah. During the war, he helped smuggle refugees out of Europe. But some of those ships carried more than people: gold, artifacts, documents that certain governments would kill to recover. Victor's family has been searching for those shipments for decades." Sarah's hand tightened on the journal. The coordinates, the names, they weren't marking burial sites for treasure. They were marking the final resting places of ships that had never reached their destinations, ships that had been deliberately sunk to keep their cargo from falling into the wrong hands. "My grandfather sank them," she whispered, understanding flooding through her. He sank his own ships. Morrison nodded grimly. And now Victor thinks you can lead him to the wrecks. The journal, Sarah. That's what he's really after, not some buried treasure in your house or the shipyard, but the locations of 3 ships that went down in the Sound. Lightning illuminated the abandoned marina ahead of them, where skeletal masts rose like grave markers from the black water. Sarah realized with a chill that they weren't running away from the treasure site. They were running toward it. He's been hurting us, she breathed. All of this, the attacks, the searches, he's been driving me here. Morrison's hand moved to his weapon as dark figures emerged from behind the derelict boats. Victor stepped into view, no longer bothering with pretense. His smile was cold as winter steel. Very good, Sarah. I was beginning to think you'd never put it together. His accent was thicker now, his civilized mask finally dropped. Your grandfather was cleverer than we gave him credit for, but not clever enough. The journal, please. Sarah looked between Morrison and Victor, her grandfather's words echoing in her memory. Trust no one, not even those who claim to help. The detective's hand was steady on his gun, but his eyes held secrets of their own. The rain continued to fall, washing away her last illusions of safety as she realized the game had only just begun. The morning sun cast long shadows across the shiphouse floor as Elena spread the decoded documents across her grandfather's workbench. Her hands trembled as she traced the intricate maps with her finger, finally understanding the magnitude of what lay hidden beneath her feet. The fortune wasn't just gold or jewels. It was something far more valuable and dangerous. "Mama, you've been down here all night." Sophie's voice drifted from the top of the stairs, concern evident in her tone. "Just a little longer, sweetheart," Elena called back, though her eyes never left the papers. The symbols she'd spent hours deciphering revealed a network of tunnels that extended far beyond the shiphouse, connecting to the old maritime district and running directly under the harbor. But it wasn't the tunnels themselves that made her heart race, it was what they contained. Her grandfather hadn't just been hiding treasure, he'd been protecting evidence of a massive smuggling operation that had funded half the city's development in the 1940s. Names of prominent families, government officials, and business leaders filled the margins of his meticulous records. People whose descendants still held power, still had reputations to protect. The sound of footsteps on gravel outside made her freeze. Moving quickly, she gathered the documents and stuffed them into the waterproof case her grandfather had left them in. Through the grimy window, she watched as Marcus approached with 2 other men she didn't recognize. Their expensive suits and predatory movements told her everything she needed to know. Elena's mind raced through her options. The main entrance was blocked, but the tunnel entrance her grandfather had shown her in his final letter was hidden behind the false wall near the back of the building. She could hear Marcus's voice now, smooth and commanding as he directed his companions around the perimeter. "We know you're in there, Elena. Let's make this easy for everyone involved." She pressed herself against the wall beside the window, clutching the case to her chest. Above, she could hear Sophie and Tommy moving around, probably getting ready for school as if this were any normal Tuesday morning. The thought of them discovering her gone, or worse, finding strangers ransacking their temporary home, made her stomach clench. The door rattled as someone tested the lock she'd reinforced just days earlier. It would hold, but not for long. Elena moved toward the back wall, running her hands along the weathered boards until she found the sequence of knots her grandfather had described. Press twice on the 3rd knot, once on the 7th, then slide the panel to the left. The wall shifted with a grinding sound that seemed impossibly loud in the morning quiet. Behind it lay darkness and the smell of stagnant water. Elena grabbed the flashlight from the workbench and squeezed through the opening, pulling the panel closed behind her just as she heard the front door splinter. The tunnel was narrow and slick with moisture, forcing her to move in a crouch. Her flashlight beam revealed stone walls that wept with decades of condensation and a floor that squelched beneath her feet. Every few yards, she passed alcoves carved into the rock, some containing rotted wooden crates, others holding nothing but shadows and the skittering sounds of unseen creatures. Behind her, muffled voices echoed through the shiphouse. They'd found the workbench, probably discovered signs of her recent presence. How long before they found the hidden entrance? How long before they realized the tunnel system existed at all? The passage began to slope downward, and Elena could hear the distant sound of water lapping against stone. She was heading toward the harbor, just as the maps had indicated. But where exactly would she emerge, and what would she do then, with Marcus and his people surely watching every exit? Her flashlight caught something ahead. Another branching passage, this one leading upward. According to her grandfather's notes, it should connect to the basement of the old customs house, now converted to apartments. If she could reach it without being detected, she might be able to circle back and warn the children. The sound of pursuit echoed from behind her now, multiple flashlight beams dancing off the tunnel walls. They'd found her trail faster than expected. Elena quickened her pace, the case banging against her hip as she half ran through the increasingly narrow passage. At the junction, she paused to catch her breath and check the map once more. The customs house passage was marked with a symbol she hadn't seen before, a warning of some kind, but with voices growing closer and no other options, she plunged into the ascending tunnel. The air grew thicker as she climbed, and her flashlight began to flicker ominously. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit had grown fainter, as if her hunters had taken a different route. That should have been reassuring, but instead, it filled her with dread. Marcus was too smart to simply lose her trail, which meant he knew something about these tunnels that she didn't, something that made him confident he could reach her destination before she did. The ancient floorboards groaned under Sarah's weight as she descended into the shiphouse's hidden basement, her flashlight cutting through decades of accumulated darkness. Behind her, Marcus kept watch, while Emma and Jake huddled near the entrance, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement that only children could muster in such circumstances. The beam revealed stone walls that predated the wooden structure above, carved directly into the rocky foundation of the coast. Water stains marked the walls like ancient hieroglyphs, telling stories of storms and high tides that had tested this sanctuary over the generations. But it was what lay beyond the watermarks that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Wooden crates lined the far wall, each bearing shipping marks in faded ink. Some displayed dates from the 1940s, others even older. Her grandfather's handwriting was visible on several, notes scrawled in his distinctive cramped style that she remembered from old birthday cards and Christmas lists. "Mom, what is all this stuff?" Emma whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. Sarah approached the nearest crate, noting how the wood remained solid despite the moisture. Someone had taken great care in preservation. Her fingers traced the lid until she found the catch, a simple metal clasp that yielded with surprising ease. Inside, wrapped in oiled canvas, lay documents, lots of them. As Sarah carefully lifted the first bundle, she recognized the letterhead of various shipping companies, insurance firms, and what appeared to be government correspondence. The dates spanned decades, but all bore one common thread, her grandfather's name, listed not as a simple dock worker as she'd always believed, but as a maritime insurance investigator. "He wasn't just fixing boats," she murmured, scanning a particularly detailed report about a cargo vessel that had mysteriously sunk off the coast in 1962. He was investigating them. Marcus climbed down beside her, his expression grim. "The people following you, they're not just treasure hunters, are they? They're covering tracks." Before Sarah could respond, Jake's voice carried down from above, tight with worry. "Someone's coming. I can see lights on the road." The flashlight beam wavered in Sarah's suddenly unsteady hand. She grabbed another bundle of documents, stuffing them into her jacket, along with what appeared to be a leather-bound ledger, whatever secrets her grandfather had uncovered, whatever had made him valuable enough to kill for. The answers lay in these papers. "We need another way out," Marcus said, already moving toward the back wall of the basement. Sarah's mind raced through childhood memories of playing in the shiphouse. Her grandfather had always been particular about certain areas, places he'd gently but firmly steered her away from. She remembered a door, partially hidden behind old fishing nets, that he'd claimed led only to a storage closet. There, she pointed to the far corner where shadows seemed to gather more thickly. Marcus's flashlight revealed what she'd hoped, a narrow door, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. The handle turned with surprising ease, revealing a tunnel that sloped downward toward the sound of waves. It leads to the beach, Sarah realized. He built an escape route. The approaching vehicle sounds grew louder, accompanied by voices, professional voices, coordinated and calm in a way that chilled Sarah more than shouting would have. "Take only what we can carry quickly," she instructed, grabbing one more small crate that felt surprisingly heavy for its size. Marcus helped Emma down into the tunnel while Jake scrambled after them, his young face set with determination that reminded Sarah painfully of her grandfather. The tunnel was barely wide enough for an adult, carved through the rock with tools that must have taken months of patient work. Her grandfather hadn't just been paranoid, he'd been preparing. For what exactly, Sarah was beginning to understand as she clutched the documents against her chest. Behind them, footsteps echoed in the main shiphouse. Flashlight beams swept through the building above, methodical and thorough. These weren't amateurs stumbling around in the dark. They knew exactly what they were looking for, and they knew this place well enough to navigate it efficiently. The tunnel ended at a concealed opening behind a jumble of rocks near the waterline. Sarah emerged first, scanning the moonlit beach for threats while Marcus helped the children navigate the slippery stones. The night air felt sharp after the musty confines of the tunnel, carrying the salt spray that had been the soundtrack of her childhood. "The car's too exposed," Marcus said, reading her thoughts. "They'll have people watching it." Sarah nodded, her mind already shifting to their next move. In her jacket, the documents felt like they weighed more than gold. Whatever her grandfather had discovered, whatever web of corruption and murder had been spinning around her family for generations, she finally held pieces of the truth. The question was whether she'd live long enough to understand them, or whether the shadows that had claimed her grandfather would finally catch up to claim her too. The ancient floorboards groaned under Elena's weight as she descended into the shiphouse's hidden basement, her flashlight cutting through the musty darkness. Behind her, Marcus kept watch while Tommy and Sarah huddled close, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The wooden steps, worn smooth by decades of use, led deeper than she'd imagined possible. "Mom, it smells like the ocean down here," Sarah whispered, her small voice echoing off unseen walls. Elena paused, realizing her daughter was right. The briny scent grew stronger with each step, as if seawater had soaked into the very foundation of this place. When her feet finally touched solid ground, she swept the flashlight in a wide arc, revealing a chamber that defied explanation. The room stretched far beyond what the shiphouse's footprint should have allowed. Massive wooden beams, clearly salvaged from old ships, supported the ceiling. Along the walls, dozens of metal strongboxes sat on heavy wooden shelves, their surfaces green with age. But it was the far wall that made Elena's breath catch. An enormous maritime map covered the entire surface, marked with red X's and dates spanning nearly a century. "My God," Marcus breathed beside her. "Your grandfather wasn't just a fisherman." Elena approached the map, her heart hammering. Coastal locations from Maine to the Carolinas bore markings in her grandfather's familiar handwriting. Dates, coordinates, and cryptic notes filled every margin. Some entries were recent, disturbingly recent. "Blackwater Cove, 1987, she read aloud. 37 recovered. Mitchell's Point, 1994. Storm damage, contents relocated. Her finger traced the coastline, following a pattern she was beginning to understand. He was moving things, hiding them. Tommy tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, look at this." In the corner sat an old desk, its surface covered with nautical charts and leather-bound ledgers. Elena opened the top book, recognizing her grandfather's meticulous handwriting. The pages detailed recovery operations, salvage missions, and something that made her blood run cold, surveillance reports on the Hawthorne family dating back to the 1940s. "They've been watching us for generations," she whispered, scanning page after page of notes about her relatives. Birth dates, addresses, career changes, marriages, deaths, all documented with chilling precision. But watching for what? Marcus had begun examining the strong boxes. "Elena, these aren't locked. It's like he expected someone in the family to find them eventually." He lifted the lid of the nearest box, revealing stacks of old documents wrapped in oilcloth. Elena set down the ledger and joined him. The first document she unwrapped was a ship's manifest from 1943, listing cargo bound for England. The second was a military dispatch, heavily redacted but bearing official seals. As she unfolded more papers, a pattern emerged. These weren't just salvage records, they were evidence. "The merchant vessel Aurora," she read from a water-stained report, "sunk 12 miles off Gull's Rock, October 15, 1943. Official cause, enemy action. Actual cause." She paused, her hands shaking. "Actual cause, deliberately scuttled to prevent cargo inspection." "What kind of cargo?" Marcus asked, though his expression suggested he already suspected. Elena continued reading, her grandfather's notes revealing a conspiracy that stretched back to World War II. Ships deliberately sunk, cargo secretly recovered, and a network of coastal families paid to maintain silence. The Aurora had been carrying more than supplies to Allied forces. It had been smuggling artifacts and artwork looted from occupied territories. He wasn't just salvaging shipwrecks, she realized. He was part of something bigger, a recovery operation that's been going on for decades. A sudden crash from upstairs made them all freeze. Marcus immediately clicked off his flashlight, plunging them into darkness. Footsteps echoed through the floorboards above, moving with purpose through the shiphouse. "Elena?" a voice called down, cultured and familiar. "I know you're down there. We really need to talk." "Cornelius Blackwood." Elena's stomach dropped as she recognized the antiquities dealer's voice. But how had he found them? "There's another way out," she whispered to Marcus, remembering the ocean scent that had grown stronger as they descended. "The smell, there has to be access to the water." Moving carefully in the darkness, Elena felt along the far wall beyond the map. Her fingers found what she was looking for, a narrow door almost hidden behind the massive chart. The ocean sound was louder here, and cool air flowed through the gaps around the frame. "Elena, this really doesn't have to be difficult," Blackwood called, his voice now coming from the stairway. "Your grandfather was a reasonable man. I'm hoping you inherited that trait." The door opened to reveal a tunnel carved from living rock, leading toward the sound of lapping waves. Elena gathered the most important documents, stuffing them inside her jacket while Marcus helped the children toward their escape route. Behind them, Blackwood's footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs, and a powerful beam of light began sweeping the chamber. Whatever her grandfather had discovered, whatever he'd been protecting all these years, Elena was now carrying it with her into the unknown darkness of the tunnel. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the shiphouse as Sarah pressed herself against the cold stone wall. Emma and Jake huddled behind her. Through the gaps in the weathered planks, she could see flashlight beams cutting through the darkness like vengeful spirits. Victor's men had found them. "The tunnels," she whispered, remembering the hidden passages her grandfather had shown her in his journal. They were somewhere behind the massive support beam where she'd discovered the first cache of documents. Her fingers traced the wall desperately, searching for the concealed entrance while footsteps thundered above on the main floor. Emma whimpered softly, and Sarah's heart clenched. Her children had been through too much already, but they were so close to the truth now. The documents they'd uncovered revealed everything. The Nazi gold her grandfather had helped steal from a U-boat, the decades-long conspiracy to recover it, and most shocking of all, the identity of the American official who'd been feeding information to Victor's organization for over 50 years. A section of the wall suddenly gave way under her touch, revealing a narrow passage that smelled of salt and decades-old secrets. "This way," she breathed, guiding Emma and Jake into the darkness. The tunnel was barely wide enough for an adult, carved directly into the rocky foundation of the coastal cliff. Her grandfather had been thorough in his preparations. Behind them, she heard the basement door crash open. Victor's voice carried clearly through the stone walls, cold and precise. "She's here somewhere." The thermal imaging showed 3 heat signatures entering the building 20 minutes ago. Sarah's blood ran cold. They'd been watching, waiting, letting her do the hard work of uncovering the treasure's location. She clutched the waterproof bag containing the final map, the one that revealed not just where the gold was hidden, but how to access it safely. The Nazi submarine captain had been paranoid about betrayal, rigging the cache with explosives that would detonate if approached incorrectly. The tunnel sloped downward, following the natural contours of the cliff. Ancient wooden supports creaked ominously as they passed, and Sarah prayed they wouldn't collapse. Jake's breathing was labored in the thin air, but he pressed on without complaint. Her brave boy. Both her children had shown courage she never knew they possessed. A distant rumble made her freeze. The sound was mechanical, rhythmic. Boats, multiple engines approaching the hidden cove below. Victor hadn't just sent men through the Shiphouse, he'd surrounded them completely. "Mom," Emma whispered, "there's light ahead." Sarah squinted into the gloom and saw it, a faint glow emanating from somewhere deeper in the tunnel system. Not electric light, but something else, something that flickered like flame. As they crept closer, the passage opened into a natural cavern carved by centuries of tide action, and there, in the center, was something that made Sarah's breath catch. The Nazi submarine's emergency cache sat exactly where her grandfather's map had indicated, but it wasn't just gold bars and stolen artifacts. Documents were scattered across a makeshift table held down by corroded weights. Maps, photographs, and what appeared to be coded communications. Someone had been here recently, very recently. "You're persistent, I'll give you that." Sarah spun around to find Marcus stepping out of the shadows, his familiar face now cold and calculating. Marcus, who'd helped her research the property records. Marcus, who'd seemed so concerned about her safety. Marcus, whose family had lived in the area for generations, just like Victor's organization. "You," she breathed, understanding flooding through her. "You've been watching us from the beginning." "My family has been watching yours for 70 years, he confirmed, producing a pistol from his jacket. "Waiting for someone desperate enough to risk everything for the truth. Your grandfather was too careful, too paranoid, but you, a desperate mother with nothing left to lose, you were exactly what we needed." Emma pressed closer to Sarah's side, and she could feel her daughter trembling. "The children don't need to be here for this," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Marcus shook his head. "I'm afraid they do. You see, your grandfather left one final safeguard. The treasure isn't just protected by explosives. It requires a blood key, direct descendant DNA to be precise." The old Nazi was fascinated by emerging genetic science. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. They didn't just need her to find the treasure, they needed her children's blood to claim it. The mechanical rumbling grew louder, and she realized Victor's boats were moving into position in the cove below. Soon this cavern would be flooded with armed men. But her grandfather had been cleverer than any of them realized. Sarah's hand found the emergency flare in her jacket pocket, the one she'd grabbed from the Shiphouse. If Marcus wanted the treasure so badly, perhaps it was time to show him exactly what her grandfather had hidden down here, and why some secrets were meant to stay buried forever. The storm had passed, leaving the Shiphouse eerily quiet, except for the steady drip of rainwater through damaged boards. Sarah pressed herself against the cold stone wall of the hidden chamber, her heart hammering as footsteps echoed from the floors above. Marcus had found them. "Emma, stay close to me," she whispered, pulling her daughter tight against her side. Tommy clutched the leather journal they'd discovered, his young face pale in the dim light of their single flashlight. The footsteps grew louder, more deliberate. Marcus wasn't trying to hide his presence anymore. He knew they were trapped. "Sarah Chen," his voice called out, smooth and confident. "There's nowhere left to run. Your grandfather was clever, I'll give him that, but not clever enough. We've been patient for 70 years. Our patience has run out." Sarah's mind raced through their options. The chamber had only one entrance, and Marcus controlled it now. But her grandfather had been a sailor, a man who understood the value of multiple escape routes. There had to be something they were missing. She ran her hands along the stone walls, searching for any irregularity, any sign of another way out. The journal in Tommy's hands might contain the answers, but they needed time to study it properly. Time they didn't have. Emma whispered, pointing to a section of the wall where the mortar looked different, newer somehow. Sarah examined it closer and realized it wasn't mortar at all, but some kind of putty that had been painted to match the surrounding stone. The footsteps were getting closer. Marcus had found the entrance to the chamber. Working quickly but quietly, Sarah began scraping away the false mortar with her keys. Behind it, she found not another passage, but a small cavity containing a metal box. Her grandfather's initials were etched into its surface. "The final piece," she breathed, remembering his letter. He'd written about leaving something for her, something that would level the playing field. Inside the box were 3 items: a yellowed photograph, a set of coordinates written on naval stationery, and a small brass key unlike any she'd seen before. The photograph showed her grandfather standing beside a man in a Nazi uniform, but both men were smiling, their poses casual and friendly. Tommy opened the journal to a page near the back, his finger tracing the faded ink. "Mom, look. Grandpa wrote about Operation Neptune's treasure. He says the Nazis weren't just stealing gold, they were stealing information, scientific research, weapons technology, and Papa was feeding them false information," Sarah realized, studying the photograph again. He was a double agent. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the chamber as Marcus forced his way through the concealed entrance. His silhouette appeared in the doorway, backlit by the wan light filtering down from above. "How touching," Marcus said, stepping into the chamber. "A family reunion with the dead. Your grandfather cost my organization millions during the war, Miss Chen. Cost US opportunities that could have changed history." "Good," Sarah said, standing and positioning herself between Marcus and her children. "He was protecting innocent people from monsters like you." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Innocent? Your grandfather knew exactly what those documents contained: rocket technology, nuclear research, medical experiments. He could have shortened the war by years, saved countless lives. Instead, he chose to play games." Sarah glanced at the coordinates in her hand. They pointed to a location she recognized: the old lighthouse on Beacon Point, visible from the Shiphouse windows. Her grandfather's final secret wasn't hidden here at all. "The treasure isn't here," she said suddenly. "It never was." Marcus's expression shifted, uncertainty flickering across his features. "You're lying." "The coordinates," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. "The real treasure is at Beacon Point. That's why you could never find it, no matter how many times you searched this place. Papa was smarter than all of you." She was gambling everything on a bluff, hoping Marcus's greed would override his caution. If she could get him to leave, get him away from her children, she might be able to find another way out. But Marcus studied her face carefully, his pale eyes calculating. "Perhaps. But you'll forgive me if I don't simply take your word for it. We'll all go to Beacon Point together. A family outing." The brass key felt warm in Sarah's palm, and she noticed symbols etched along its edge, symbols that matched markings she'd seen carved into the lighthouse's foundation years ago. Her grandfather really had planned for this moment, had anticipated that someday his family would need to finish what he'd started. Marcus gestured toward the entrance with his gun. "After you, Miss Chen. And please don't do anything foolish. Your children's safety depends entirely on your cooperation." As they climbed toward the main floor of the Shiphouse, Sarah caught sight of the lighthouse through a broken window. Whatever waited for them there, whatever final secret her grandfather had hidden, she would face it, for Emma and Tommy, for the truth. The ancient wooden ladder groaned under their combined weight as Sarah descended into the hidden chamber beneath the Shiphouse foundation. Her flashlight beam cut through the musty darkness, revealing stone walls that predated the building above by decades. Emma and Jake pressed close behind her, their breathing shallow in the confined space. "Mom, look at this," Emma whispered, pointing to carved symbols etched into the rock face. The markings were crude but deliberate, arrows pointing deeper into the tunnel that stretched beyond their light. Sarah's heart hammered as she recognized the passage from her grandfather's final journal entry. This was where Captain Nathaniel Morse had hidden the real treasure after the Civil War, not the decoy chest they'd found upstairs. The fortune that had cost so many lives lay somewhere in this underground labyrinth. A distant crash echoed from above, followed by heavy footsteps. Castellanos and his men had found them. "Move," Sarah urged, pushing her children forward into the tunnel. The passage was narrow, forcing them to walk single file through the damp corridor, carved from living rock. Spider webs brushed against their faces as they pressed deeper underground. Behind them, voices carried down through the chamber opening. Castellanos was shouting orders, his words distorted by the stone, but his fury unmistakable. A beam of light appeared at the tunnel entrance, growing stronger as their pursuers descended. The passage forked ahead, splitting into two directions. Sarah paused, consulting the faded map she'd torn from her grandfather's journal. The left path led to what appeared to be a dead end, while the right curved toward what looked like a larger chamber. This way, she decided, guiding them right. But after 50 yards, the tunnel began to slope downward at a treacherous angle. Water seeped through cracks in the walls, making the stone floor slippery and dangerous. Jake stumbled, his cry echoing through the passage before Sarah could silence him. The sound carried back toward their pursuers like a beacon. "There!" Castellanos' voice boomed. "They went right!" Sarah cursed under her breath. They had to move faster, but the tunnel was becoming increasingly unstable. Loose stones scattered under their feet, and she could hear the ominous sound of settling rock overhead. The passage opened into a circular chamber with multiple exits branching off in different directions. In the center stood a stone pedestal, weathered by age and moisture. Sarah approached it carefully, her flashlight revealing an ornate metal box, secured with an intricate lock mechanism. "Is that it?" Emma asked breathlessly. Before Sarah could answer, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the tunnel behind them. She studied the lock, 7 rotating dials with symbols that matched those from her grandfather's research. The combination had to be hidden somewhere in his notes. "Watch the tunnels," she told the children, pulling out the journal pages she'd memorized over the past weeks. Her fingers trembled as she worked the dials, trying different combinations based on dates, coordinates, and coded phrases from Nathaniel's writings. A flashlight beam appeared in the tunnel they'd come from. Castellanos emerged into the chamber, his expensive suit torn and dirty, his face twisted with desperate greed. 2 armed men flanked him, their weapons trained on Sarah's family. "Step away from the box, Mrs. Chen," Castellanos commanded, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "You've led me exactly where I needed to go. I should thank you." Sarah's hands continued working the lock mechanism. "You killed Marcus Blackwood for this." Marcus was weak. He wanted to make a deal, share the profits. But some treasures are too valuable to share. Castellanos gestured for his men to advance. The Morse fortune belongs to those strong enough to claim it. The 7th dial clicked into place. Sarah felt the lock mechanism release with a metallic whisper that seemed to echo through the chamber like a death knell. Inside the box, nestled in faded velvet, lay not gold or jewels but documents. Dozens of them, land deeds, stock certificates, bank account numbers, and legal papers dating back over a century. The real treasure wasn't precious metals, but ownership stakes in properties and companies that had grown exponentially valuable over decades. Castellanos's eyes widened as he understood. Those documents, they represent millions. Billions, Sarah corrected, scanning the papers. Her grandfather hadn't just hidden a fortune, he'd preserved a financial empire that had been accumulating wealth for generations. One of Castellanos's men stepped closer, but as he did, the chamber floor began to vibrate. Dust rained from the ceiling, and a deep rumbling sound emanated from the walls around them. The weight of so many people in the unstable chamber was triggering a collapse. Cracks appeared in the stone overhead, spreading like spider webs across the ancient masonry. "The whole place is coming down," Jake shouted over the growing noise. Sarah grabbed the documents and shoved them into her jacket. Around them, the underground chamber that had kept its secrets for over a century was finally surrendering to time and gravity. The warehouse smelled of salt and decades-old wood rot, but Sarah barely noticed as she crouched behind a stack of crates with Emma and Jake pressed close beside her. Through the grimy windows, she could see Marcus Blackwood's men spreading out across the pier, their flashlight beams cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like searching fingers. "Mom, I'm scared," Emma whispered, her small hand finding Sarah's. "I know, sweetheart, but we're going to be okay." Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand while scanning the warehouse for another exit. The treasure, 3 canvas bags heavy with gold coins, precious stones and bearer bonds, sat at their feet. After 70 years hidden in the Shiphouse's secret compartment, her grandfather's fortune was finally within reach. If they could just get out alive. Jake peered around the crates. "There's a boat at the far end of the dock. Maybe we could—" "No." Sarah shook her head. "Too exposed. They'd see us before we got halfway there." The sound of splintering wood echoed through the warehouse as the main door burst open. Blackwood's voice carried across the space, cold and commanding. "Sarah Chen, I know you're here. Your grandfather was stubborn too, but look how that ended for him." Sarah's blood ran cold. She'd suspected Blackwood's family had been involved in her grandfather's mysterious disappearance, but hearing it confirmed made her stomach clench with rage and fear. "He hid it well. I'll give him that," Blackwood continued, his footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. "Took us decades to realize the Shiphouse itself wasn't the hiding place. Clever man, using the building as a decoy while the real treasure was buried beneath it." Heavy boots moved closer to their hiding spot. Sarah spotted a small door marked office about 20 feet away. If they could reach it quietly, maybe they could find another way out. She motioned to the children, pointing toward the door. They moved like shadows, Sarah carrying 2 of the treasure bags, while Jake shouldered the third despite her protests. Emma stayed between them, following their grandfather's old advice about moving silently that Sarah had shared during their escape from the Shiphouse. They almost made it. A floorboard creaked under Jake's foot just as they reached the office door. Immediately, shouts erupted from across the warehouse. Flashlight beams swung in their direction. "Run!" Sarah shoved the children through the office door, slamming it behind them just as the first gunshot rang out. The bullet splintered the doorframe inches from her head. The office was small and cramped, filled with dusty maritime charts and rusted filing cabinets. But Sarah spotted what she was hoping for, a window facing the water and below it, a fire ladder leading down to a small service dock. Out the window, now. She helped Emma through first, then Jake with his precious burden. As she swung her leg over the sill, the office door exploded inward. Blackwood stood in the doorway, gun drawn, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled from the chase. "End of the line, Mrs. Chen." "Actually," Sarah said, pulling her grandfather's old flare gun from her jacket, "I think this is just the beginning." She fired the flare directly at the stacks of old papers and charts scattered around the office. The phosphorus ignited everything it touched, creating an instant wall of flame between her and Blackwood. Sarah dropped through the window, landing hard on the fire escape as smoke began pouring from the building above. The children were already at the bottom, and she could see Jake frantically untying a small fishing boat moored to the service dock. "Mom, hurry!" Emma called out. Sarah half climbed, half fell down the ladder as flames began licking at the window above. Blackwood's curses were audible even over the crackling fire, but he couldn't follow, not through the inferno the office had become. They tumbled into the fishing boat just as sirens began wailing in the distance. Someone had called the fire department. Jake had managed to get the old outboard motor started, and they puttered away from the dock as the warehouse fire spread, illuminating the harbor in orange light. "Where are we going?" Emma asked, huddled against Sarah's side. Sarah looked back at the burning building, then at her children, her brave, resourceful children who had helped her uncover a family mystery and reclaim their future. In the distance, she could see Blackwood and his men retreating from the fire, but she wasn't worried about them anymore. The police would have questions about the fire, and she had plenty of answers about the Blackwood family's decades-long harassment of her family. "Home," she said, wrapping her arms around both children. "We're going home. And then we're going to build ourselves the kind of life your great-grandfather always dreamed we'd have." As they headed across the harbor toward shore, the treasure bags secure at their feet, Sarah Chen smiled for the first time in months. The hunt was over. Their new life was just beginning.